F1. Red flag. Red flag's to slow down. What?
The checkered flag is waiting.
I can see our Checkered Flag podcast being quite spicy.
5 Live's Checkered Flag podcast.
Well, the 9th race of the season did see the two-time champion take a 7th win in 2023, but despite the rather inevitable result, behind him we saw some incredible wheel-to-wheel battles. But in the end, it was Max Verstappen ahead of Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, and Sergio Perez from towards the back recovered onto the podium. It was a 10th consecutive race win, though, for Red Bull in Formula One, achieved at their home track, and with that, the gap at the top of the Drivers' Championship is now 91 points, with Red Bull pulling away even further in the Constructors' standings by 199 points. Alongside myself, Harry Benjamin, calling all the action was the former Williams driver Jack Aitken and the BBC's chief F1 writer Andrew Benson. And Jack, well, let's get into it, because he did win again. Verstappen, superior, ominous, and just didn't put a foot wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a little bit dull, but he is just doing a fantastic job at the moment, along with the Red Bull team. They, like you say, didn't put a foot wrong, executed what they needed to, and even got the point for fastest lap. So it was really hard to see anyone else taking it coming into today. And yeah, he just pulled it off in confident fashion.
Well, let's hear what he had to say, if anything, after the race.
Hey Max, congratulations. How much does it mean to you to win here in front of your home fans, but also first time we've been here since obviously we lost to Chequered?
Yeah, I mean it's been a very positive weekend for us. You know, with the sprint format, it is always a bit more hectic, but I think we did everything well as a team, and today the car was really good. I think we're really looking well after our tires, and then of course you can just settle into a rhythm. And I think also, you know, the virtual safety car made it a bit different for strategies for quite a few cars, but we just stuck to our own one. And I think that worked out well, to be honest, at the end.
Did you always feel like you had enough to fend off that threat from the Ferraris?
Yeah, I think the pace was good. I mean, it wouldn't have mattered what kind of strategy they did. I think we always had the upper hand in the race.
And did you go backwards and forwards a couple of times with the team about that fastest lap request at the end?
I think they could hear in my voice that I wanted to pit, so luckily they called me in.
Okay,
so I can sleep well tonight.
Brilliant, thanks, Max.
Well, that was Max Verstappen there, speaking after yet another win in his amazing and superior 2023 Formula One season so far. There was a little bit of action, though, with Verstappen having to sort of, after his pit stop, having to cut through the field a little bit, but really we're clutching at straws there, because he could just drive past and it was all inevitable. That's the issue, isn't it, Benson? It's inevitable.
Well, I think in its way that just demonstrated their superiority even more, because there was a VSC, a virtual safety car period, and everybody chose to come in during that virtual safety car period. The Ferraris didn't come in on the first lap, but that was because Leclerc was past the pit entry by the time the light came on his dashboard. But Verstappen and Red Bull decided to stay out just so they could do their own strategy. So they can afford, what that's saying is that they can afford to throw away the 10 plus seconds that cost them, just because they know that with their pace in their car they can just run their own race, and it almost doesn't matter what everybody else does. And what we then saw was Verstappen on an offset strategy comes out behind both Ferraris, just cruises past them as if they're not there effectively.
I think even if Verstappen started in Graz, he'd still probably win the race.
Yeah, in a way that you saw that, for example, Perez couldn't do when he came up behind the Ferraris.
Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? That second Red Bull, the continued discussion on Perez's pace. He did get onto the podium in third, but it was Charles Leclerc who came home in second, back on the podium for the first time since Baku. So it's been a few races, and Jack, this is actually really encouraging for Ferrari and Charles Leclerc, because he owned that P2. The race pace looked good for Ferrari.
It did. I mean, it's something we've said before about the Ferraris. In practice, again, they looked like they had strong race pace, which was encouraging for them. The upgrades seemed to be working well, and Charles had quite a quiet race, but he didn't put a foot wrong. He didn't get involved in battles as Sainz had to at many points, and just kind of calmly executed his race. He knew he wasn't going to get the win today, but he managed to hold off Perez at the end of the race, doing similar lap times in what in theory should be an inferior car still.
He actually needed a race like that. He's had some difficult races in the last few ones. In fact, he was even berating himself on Saturday after qualifying because he was lacking pace in the sort of wet, dry conditions, as he had been in Canada, as in Spain. In fact, he basically admitted after qualifying, by the way, after the sprint, that the problems he thought were in the car in Spain, that the Ferrari couldn't find any, there probably weren't any. It was just struggles that he was having with that car in those conditions. They've upgraded the car quite a lot in the last couple of races, Ferrari, with the aim of making it more manageable, more stable. That seems to have worked. What we saw today was their tyre degradation was much improved compared to earlier in the season. Tyre deg was high in Austria, always is. They didn't struggle in that way. There was a bit of sort of intra-team shenanigans going on. First stint, Sainz was saying, let me by, I'm quicker. Then in the second stint, actually, Leclerc was quicker. He pulled away. Sainz came back at him a bit towards the end. And then Sainz did a fantastic job to hold Perez back for 4 laps, which gave Leclerc the breathing space to be able to be calm in the closing laps. I actually don't think Perez would have caught him anyway, because I don't think he had the pace. Leclerc was like 9 seconds ahead anyway. It was 12 by the time Perez had got past Sainz. But it was a good race for Leclerc to get sort of back into a Leclerc sort of position. He's basically the fastest driver in the second fastest car over 1 lap, and that car's beginning to look now like the second fastest car in the race as well. If Ferrari can sort of confirm that status over the next couple of races, that's a big step forward for them compared to their struggles in the first part of the year. But as Leclerc himself admitted, they've got to make another big step to challenge Verstappen.
Well, let's hear what Leclerc had to say after his P2 finish.
Hey Charles, congratulations. Great afternoon all round, and particularly after such a difficult day yesterday.
Yeah, it was very important to have a good race today, and we did a good race today. The first stint, we had to really take care of those tyres. For some reason, I was a bit struggling with the rears, so trying to take a bit of margin on that first set. And then in the second and last stint, I could push a bit more, and the pace came together quite nice. We are still far from the Red Bull, so on that we still need to work quite hard. But overall, it's been a good day, a positive feeling, and that feels good.
Do you feel like the team is making progress in terms of the pure performance?
No doubts. The team is making progress for sure. The feeling has been there since the last 2-3 races, but we really needed a dry race like this to understand exactly how much of an improvement we did, and the feeling is definitely going in the right direction. There's still a lot of work to do because Red Bull is still quite far ahead, but we are getting there.
Great stuff, congrats again.
Charles Leclerc there speaking after his P2 finish. And this is encouraging signs for Ferrari. They are currently 4th in the Constructors' battle, behind Aston Martin in 3rd, Mercedes just a few points in front of Aston Martin in 2nd. But on a day where actually Aston Martin seemed to struggle in the race comparatively to Alonso, the best of them, in 6th. Jack, this is really good for Ferrari, who seem to be in this tight pack behind the Red Bulls, starting to find their feet a little bit. They are berated for strategy calls every other race, but this time it seems that both drivers are on the pace and they are working their way back up to being best of the rest.
Yeah, it definitely looks that way. Aston do seem to be sliding back a little bit, whether it's because of the development race and not quite having the same pace as Ferrari. They look pretty average this weekend, and that's even with, you would think, an upturn in pace from Stroll, who's been a lot closer to Alonso this weekend, outqualified his teammate for the first time in a long time, not the first time at all, but they do seem to be getting more out of that car as a duo, and they're still not able to really challenge the Ferraris. And watching the way that the Ferrari drivers were throwing the car around, particularly in the last couple of corners of this lap, which are very challenging, very high speed, and require a hell of a lot of confidence. They seem to have just that, the confidence. They really seem to trust their machinery. Leclerc in particular looked just brilliant in the last 2 corners. So they seem a bit more on song, and that's very encouraging for them.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is it's the battle's ebbing and flowing to do with circuit characteristics. So now Ferrari have got their upgrade on. Before they were Ferrari's pattern before was super quick in qualifying, dropping like a stone in the race with a car that the drivers basically couldn't handle. They put an upgrade on the car in Barcelona so we can almost forget what happened before that. Since then, they have been edging forward. But it's difficult to make a definitive judgment right now as to how that battle's going to go, because you had Aston Martin, Fernando Alonso could have won in Monaco if they'd made the right tyre choice at the right time. I'm not criticising them there because it was a difficult decision with the track conditions and the weather and everything and so on. Then they got to Barcelona, Aston Martin were basically nowhere there. Then Alonso's second again in Canada, passes Hamilton on the way there, challenges Verstappen relatively closely for this year, so only 9 seconds behind at the flag. Then again, Austria, Aston Martin, clearly the track hasn't suited them this weekend. Worrying for Aston Martin, I think, is that, Barcelona, long corners, quick corners, Austria, there's 3 hairpins, but then long corners, quick corners, Silverstone, long corners, quick corners, although also some slow speed to put into the mix there too. Hungary is a very flowing circuit with, again, long corners. Spa, high speed, long corners. This could be that Aston Martin are going into a slightly difficult period here. The question is, where are Ferrari going to swing out in that little mix? Mercedes, by the way, terrible day for them, really off the pace. Hamilton and Russell finishing well down the field, and that's a bit concerning for them. But then they've got a big upgrade coming for Silverstone next weekend, so it's really, really hard to predict how the 3 of them are going to play out behind the Red Bulls.
I know we say it time and time again, but take Red Bull and Max Verstappen out of this championship, and it is a really tasty fight behind that we don't quite know how it's going to play out. Let's finish off the podium, shall we? It was Sergio Perez in the Red Bull, who recovered from 15th, Jack, after his lap time was deleted for track limits in Friday's qualifying session. So a good recovery from Perez, but again, he's still clearly nowhere near as fast as Verstappen. And is this good enough for the second Red Bull right now?
Yeah, it's a tough question, isn't it? And it's one that I think will still be in the minds of the Red Bull bosses. Today was definitely a solid drive for Perez. He, did pretty much what was asked of him, make the recovery, get back to the podium where that car should be. Clearly it has the pace to do that. When Verstappen's been back in the pack before, he's made pretty light work of the field. And although Perez didn't come through at the same pace, and as we said before, he wasn't able to jump ahead of the Ferraris in the same way as Verstappen was, he still managed to get back onto the podium, and it's a solid result on a weekend where he's been complaining of illness and not being at 100%, but it's definitely not going to put those questions to bed. That's going to be hanging over him until we head to the summer break, and he really needs, in these last few races before that summer break in August, to have a strong run of races to get that confidence back, not just for himself but from his team.
Yeah, definitely coming off a bit of a bad patch. Well, let's see what Checo made of his race in his own words.
Yeah, I'm pleased with that result. It was a good race. We had good pace. So very pleased with that, and now look forward for Silverstone. It's been a very tricky weekend for me. I mean, track limits really made things too difficult.
How are you feeling? What was wrong? What's been up with you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been having high fever pretty much every night. So just not 100% physically, but I hope that I'm able to recover for Silverstone.
How you feel better? Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, well, Sergio Perez there speaking to Lawrence Barretto, so clearly still suffering a bit of illness there. So a good job for him to get onto third on the podium. And he did have, Andrew, some great battles out on track, wheel to wheel with the likes of Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris as well, who ended up finishing behind Checo. But I suppose the bigger picture is that Perez isn't able to get through as quickly as Verstappen can.
Well, I completely agree. I mean, it's not just that. I mean, Verstappen is in a league of his own. It's not just against everybody else. It's also against Perez. And I have to say that in the paddock, people are asking themselves the question, how much of Red Bull's advantage is Verstappen and how much of it is the car? Everyone accepts that the car is the fastest car in the field. But they also accept that Verstappen's doing an exceptional job. We saw an interview with Alonso on CNN yesterday where he said, he thinks that Verstappen's operating on a level above everybody else, and he was including himself and Lewis Hamilton in that statement. And at the moment, I mean, Verstappen's won 7 out of 9 races. It's hard to see him losing another race at the moment. Never mind Red Bull winning all the rest of the races. Verstappen could win all the rest of the races the way he's going. And I don't see, reliability, weather, of course, all these things are going to play a part. Sooner or later, you'd think the law of averages would dictate something's got to go wrong for him somewhere along the line, but he seems to be operating so much within a comfort zone at the moment that he looks pretty much unbeatable.
Well, they say that you make your own luck, and I think we're seeing that effect a little bit, where he's got enough of an advantage over the rest of the field in terms of pace that every time you hear him on the radio, he's just so comfortable, so within himself. And that's not to say that he could easily crank out another half a second a lap. I think he is trying to get the maximum out of his car, but he's doing so in quite a calm, reserved way. He's not abusing the car, the tyres. He's expecting that he's going to be able to control things all the time. And far from the other drivers that are pushing to the absolute limits to try and get on terms with that Red Bull, he's looking very, very calm and just composed. And even the Red Bull mechanics, when they do their pit stop, that somewhat unnecessary stop at the end of the race to spin him with softs and go for the fastest lap, it was still a great pit stop. You know, they clearly are feeling the confidence too. So it's the comfort of being that far out ahead that you can operate in a different way from the other drivers in the field.
As a driver yourself, though, and it's never a smooth ride, but particularly when you're somebody like Sergio Perez, who is one of the older drivers in the field, let's not forget, who has a wealth of experience, but this is the first time he's actually, in the last couple of years since joining Red Bull, the first time he's actually got a title-winning car underneath him. But his teammate is Max Verstappen. He's coming off a rough patch of performance where there hasn't really, it's been driver error more often than not. How much does that get to you? I know Perez has been through the ringer, but will it be getting to him now? You know, he is ill this weekend. I know that's probably nothing to do with it, but you don't know the mental toll. And if Verstappen does win every single race for the rest of the year, that's a big beating to take for a driver like Sergio Perez.
It's a huge beating. I mean, the thing that is different from maybe some of the more recent teammates before Checo is that he's a bit more experienced, a bit older. And you'd think with that would come a little bit more confidence and assurance of where he is as a driver, which is to say a very good driver. But, you know, as we've said before, Verstappen is operating in his own league. And at some point it's quite disheartening, I think. You know, I think we are starting to see some cracks. The qualifying performance that he put on Friday was pretty shocking. I mean, not just from a point of view of pace. The pace was there. He wasn't that far off Verstappen at times, but he just couldn't get himself into a position where he was cleanly executing. And it's the opposite of what I was talking about with Max. Perez is clearly pushing things so hard to try and get on terms with him, as we've seen with previous teammates, that he's pushing himself to a place where he's not comfortable. He's making these errors. And yeah, he pulled himself back for today, but it's not going to be enough, not nearly enough to get on terms with Max just to be, you know, getting that car into the podium and just about getting to the podium, when Max would probably have taken that well into the fight for the lead.
Right, well, Jack Aitken, the former Williams driver, still alongside me for a bit more Austrian Grand Prix chat. Andrew alluded earlier about Mercedes having a bit of a tough race, and there was loads of hope around this team after the big upgrade, which was introduced in Monaco, seen properly in Barcelona and resulted in a double podium. But 7th for Lewis Hamilton, 8th for George Russell, and with chat of track limits as well, Hamilton getting a 5-second penalty for it too within the race, and having quite heated discussions over the radio. Toto Wolff almost having to come on and say, look, Lewis, we know we've given you a bad car, but please just drive it. That's remnants of things he was saying last year. Are we getting to worrisome times now for Mercedes? Are we going back downhill?
I don't think it's going to quite reach those levels. I think this is just Toto knowing that he has to manage his driver a little bit and trying, almost begging him, look, please just focus on the job, get this race done, and think, just think about moving forwards. Because, Lewis was one of the early victims of the track limits issues that we had today. Initially in the race, we didn't get any track limits warnings and notifications from the race stewards. So it looked like they were being more lenient than they had been during qualifying, where they were super, super strict. And then about 10-15 minutes into the race, they just started bombarding the screens of the notice board, and Hamilton effectively getting reprimanded for offences that he'd done at the start of the race, and they told him a bit too late and he got a penalty. This happened to several other drivers, and it became quite a difficult issue for the teams to stay on top of, as the driver would commit an offence for the track limits, and then about 15 minutes later they're getting the notification, by which time the driver may have used up his other two warnings if you like to then get a 5-second penalty. So they weren't the only ones struggling. But yeah, torrid day for them. No pace when it came to the race, despite qualifying not being too bad.
Well, we heard him very vocal on the radio, and we can hear him after the race. Now, here's Lewis Hamilton.
Lewis, you had a fun battle picking up off that with Lando today. What was it like?
I didn't really have any fun battles out there. I was slow, so I was just going backwards.
How frustrated were you with the track limits? Because we heard your team radio quite a few times.
I was mostly frustrated with the car, just that it was slow.
Why do you think the car's been so difficult around here?
I don't know. I think this track kind of... I think it really highlights cars' true performance, and it's for some reason we've always struggled here.
Well, Lewis Hamilton pretty downbeat then about those results. Him in 7th, his teammate behind him in 8th. Not the best time of it for Mercedes, who are though still just about in that 2nd place in the Constructors, mere points ahead of Aston Martin, and Ferrari are closing, as we've already dived into. But track limits, I don't want to talk too much about it, Jack, because it has dominated the weekend coverage, but it just seems like it's always in Austria, especially, in qualifying, it really affects things. We saw Perez having the lap time deleted. Hamilton fell foul of it as well for the sprint shootout. And this weekend ahead of the race, F1 announced Austria staying on the calendar till at least 2030. So does something need to be done to almost force the driver's hand in terms of the runoff areas? Does gravel need to be brought forward closer to the white line? How do you actually get on top of this? Because it looks a bit silly when everybody in the race, half of them getting penalties for track limits, half of them not, in qualifying, having laps deleted every single time. We didn't know who was where until about 3 laps later. Yeah, that's the problem, isn't it? The core issue is that nothing needs to be done. The circuit is up to spec, the rules are very clear, and the drivers were violating them, so they were being penalised. But it does look silly, and there are things that F1 and the track could do to avoid this situation, and it detracts from the viewer experience, and at the end of the day, that's why we're here. So I think it is reasonable to have the conversation of, well, why is it happening so often? The why is a couple of reasons. Red Bull Ring is a very high-speed track. The majority of track limit offences this weekend were in the very fast turns 9 and 10 at the end of the lap. They're both downhill, fast right-handers where your tyres are already hot from the rest of the lap. And crucially, the fastest way to get around those corners, not thinking about track limits, is to go about half a metre over the curb on exit. If you go more than that, the car starts to bottom out and you actually start to lose lap time. If you go less than that, you're not using the full track and you will carry less speed. So drivers have calibrated to just go as fast as they can to the physical limits of the track. And then, the white line is kind of a secondary consideration of, okay, I do really need to try and stick within that. If the curbing that we have now was effectively shifted half a metre inside, so that you're grounding out earlier, or there's a bit of grass or whatever have you to slow the cars down and dissuade the drivers from wanting to be there in the first place, that is by far the simplest solution to avoid this mess. And then the drivers won't want to be out there in the first place. Whereas now they know it's faster, so it's always tempting. In the first laps of this race, when we weren't getting any track limit notifications, the drivers were all thinking, because I've been there and I do it now when I drive, they're being more lenient. I'll just have a nibble here. I'll just have a nibble there. They're still not calling it. Okay, I'll take a little bit more. And it's all lap time that you can gain. And that's why drivers were being so vocal on the team radio about it, saying, he's gone off in front of me. Well, why is that allowed? I'm going to start doing it if it's allowed then. And it turns into a massive mess. So by far the easiest solution is not to shout at the drivers saying, why can't you just stay in the white lines? It is to change the track subtly and make these changes to actually make the fastest line within the white lines. Well, let's see if any of that is taken on board. Austria confirmed on the F1 calendar then until 2030 at the earliest. So it's a good track anyway. I think we like it. Always provides some pretty decent racing. So what do we get up to then? Hamilton was 7th, Russell was 8th. Rounding out the point scorers, Pierre Gasly got a couple of points in his Alpine for 9th. Lance Stroll rounded out the points with a singular point in his Aston Martin for 10th place. Just missing out Albon, Ocon, Sargent 13th, Zhou 14th, De Vries, Bottas, Piastri, Tsunoda and Magnussen, the 19 drivers that finished the race. Nico Hülkenberg, the only retirement of the race in his Haas. Driver of the day, Jack. I find it hard to look past somebody like Lando Norris for this occasion. What about you?
Lando put in a stellar drive. Yeah, it's a hard one. I think between him and you have to include Verstappen in the conversation. I know.
Oh, him. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it's boring, but he has been flawless this weekend. So, you have to give him credit for that. But go on, we'll give it to Norris because it's, nice to see the McLaren back in the fight with the Ferraris, the Mercedes and that lot.
Yeah, it really is. And that upgrade on the car, part of an incremental upgrade across the next few races. So let's see how much improvement that can bring to both McLarens. Norris, the only one with those upgrades. Piastri didn't get them for this race, and he was down in 17th in the end. But we said it already, we go to Silverstone in a few days' time, so there's really not much time to rest. British Grand Prix. You've raced there as part of the support package as well for Formula One. Does being on home soil, does it actually give you a little bit of a boost? Does it bring more pressure, or is it just like any other race?
It definitely gives you a boost as a driver. I think, the fact that you don't have to fly anywhere. It's a drive from, unless you're up in Scotland, I guess, or wherever. But it's a drive from home. Most drivers are living around Oxfordshire or wherever. And you can actually sleep in your own bed. You don't have any time zone shifts. It's a track that you've raced on since you were young, and it is refreshing to see all the British fans there. It almost feels like a homecoming after being away for so long. So I think the Brits in particular are going to love it. It's a circuit that always produces a lot of enjoyment for the drivers. The racing is quite nuanced and quite tricky with so many high-speed sections, but it's got more slow speed than what we've had in Red Bull Ring this weekend as well. So it's a good varied lap.
Excluding Verstappen and Red Bull, who are we thinking will perform well there? Are Ferrari and Leclerc in particular going to carry this form over?
I think so. I mean, it looks like the circuit will suit them. If they've done well at Red Bull Ring with these long, fast sweeping turns, they should do well at Silverstone as well. I think the Astons may continue to struggle as well in a similar vein. The interesting bunch will be Mercedes, who are going to potentially be bringing their upgrade package, and it's going to be a very crucial Friday session for them, looking through the options of how they make the most out of that package and whether it's actually performing as they expect.
Well, we're going to look forward to that one then. It should be an enthralling British Grand Prix, which gets going on Friday. And it's a typical weekend, no sprints to worry about either. So it's normal service resumed, and you can hear all of the action across BBC Radio 5 Live. OK, I think we're just about done then. Thanks to Jack Aitken. Thank you to Andrew Benson as well for his insights as ever. I've been Harry Benjamin, and we look forward to the British Grand Prix in just a few days' time. This has been an IMG production for BBC Radio 5 Live.